How did we get here? Do you ever stop and wonder why and how the world has changed so much, and not for the better, in such a short time? Do you ever wonder why people are so lazy, slouchy, self-righteous, or immoral these days? Do you ever wonder why mankind has declined so far backward in the past, let's say, 50 or 60 years or so? And what brought about that decline? Not that man has not had declines in the past, or has not done evil in the past, or wicked and even horrid things. He has. But there are reasons why this decline is happening now. First of all, there are those in power over the offices we think of as the highest in the world, such as the office of president, or premier, or prime minister, over senators, congressmen, parliamentarians, and so on. And these who are the real power behind the powers that be have had control for far longer than most of us know. Only it isn't until recently that they have begun to fully realize their power and take advantage of it. I speak of them quite frequently as the synagogue of Satan, the sons of Cain, also known as the Kenites. They are written of all through the Bible. In Revelation chapter 2 and 3, their predecessors, that is, to the ones that live now, even argued with Jesus Christ. They called him a heretic and said he hath a devil. They would not hear his words. And these today, their children, are the highest of the most elite, the most upper echelon. They control everything, from commerce to the media, including radio, most of television, movies, magazines, newspapers, the news channels, a lot of the entertainment channels. Yet, they stay well hidden and out of the spotlight, save of a few which are big names, but no one or very few recognize them for who or what they are. So let's go back to the point where they really came into their own, where they started coming to power in the modern day, and what they did to achieve this power over mankind. Again, they have always manipulated the press and controlled the outlets of information of all types. They gave men books to read, not necessarily written by themselves, but nevertheless books which raised up man to a level beyond the everyday. In short, they made everyday life boring by comparison. They deified science. They used science fiction to enthrall man into books that they could not put down. Books about things which are just not possible. Books with time machines, with space travel far beyond the stars, or aliens from other worlds to come and attack us on the earth. In short, they gave man escapes into imagination and non-reality. which when these escapes into these books were over, in other words, when the reading of the book was finished, it created a craving for more. Man had a need to be placated by ever more interesting stories, more violent, more risque content. And the same for kids. For children, it was comic books with heroes who had superhero powers, or cowboys, or any number of things children would aspire to want to be, though many never could. Now, you have to realize that the Kenite is a creature in the flesh, such as we, and they play both sides of the fence. In other words, they are human beings. But they mix good with evil. They cloak themselves behind good. Because usually the message in these children's comic books were good, with characters like Superman, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, and a large number of others like Captain America. And like I said, the messages in these books were often positive and even moral. Yet there was still the yearning and want in kids to have the powers of their comic book heroes, which again made everyday life seem boring. But they didn't stop there. No, along then came radio, where mankind could sit around and listen to all kinds of entertainment, from comedy to music to radio shows, drama radio shows about pirates, or space attacks, or mad scientists, or created monsters. And people were enthralled. Now they had books and radio, and were able for a few short hours a week to escape their normal, boring, dull lives. And radio got stronger, and also more violent. The music got a little more harder, a little more faster. Some of it was fun, some of it was sad. Some of it was the beginning of the Great Revolution and Rebellion. But we're still a little bit ahead of that time in this discussion. Then came the movies. Moving pictures. At first silent. But since they were new and since they were all the rage, people packed themselves into theaters to see these moving pictures. Most of them harmless, some humorous, and others the beginning of sci-fi, where rocket ships went off to other planet or monsters walked the earth. And then finally, sound was added to the mix, and the great epic movies began, and the B movies. Now, some were religious and had good messages, while others were more science fiction and had characters like Frankenstein, adapted from the book, where a man is able to give life to dead flesh and create a man. Or movies like King Kong with a huge ape, which most are familiar with for the number of remakes of this movie over the years. And other movies about Martians that come to the Earth and try to take over mankind, or various others. And then came television. Wonderful TV. You could now sit in your own house and watch moving pictures with sound in the comfort of your own living room. At first, TV was so innocent, packed with shows that entertained, humorous shows, variety shows, shows where hosts interviewed big stars, or you could watch the news, shows where a curse word was never heard, and happy endings were the norm. But again, life on TV was made bigger than actual life. So people huddled by their televisions. It was what you could call the first social network. The first venue, because many could sit down and watch TV and all watch the same thing at the same time and talk about it later. It gave people a sense of belonging, a sense of being there, a sense of being community. But long about the late 50s to early 60s, things began to change on radio, on TV, and in the movies. The music had a more political message. Dance moves became more risque, intimate, or sexually suggestive. TV shows, for the most part, remained clean, with shows like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Superman, based on the comic book character, and The Untouchables, which was pretty violent for its day, though blood was seldom ever seen. And these shows kept life mostly in a more real-to-life perspective, except for the superpowers of Superman. Other shows were funny or just entertaining to that generation. But then we came to the mid-60s, headed towards the late 60s, where the balance started to fail. Sure, there were good shows, The Munsters, The Addams, Batman, Star Trek. In Britain, in the early 60s, there was a show launched called Doctor Who. But shows like Star Trek and Doctor Who, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, Land of the Giants, while funny or serious or both, took us to new heights. Again, making the impossible things possible for an hour or half an hour a week. Kids wanted to be Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock or Batman. They wanted to be the Doctor's companions in the TARDIS of Doctor Who. Or any number of heroes from those time periods, like the Lone Ranger or Tonto. But as each year passed, each season ended and began anew, a little more ground was taken. Very slowly at first. But each season that came along, a little more was taken, an inch at the time, with regards to sexual promiscuity, very slightly harsher language, slightly more violence, though bloodshed was seldom if ever seen, except of course in the movies. But now then we reached the late 60s and early 70s. The hippie movement, the war protesters, all of this happening in full swing. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll became the big three escapes. And on TV, shows like All in the Family were born, or MASH, which led to spin-offs or other shows on other networks, which were vying for ratings to battle against these shows. Yet these shows heralded in the first curse words ever heard on TV, the first uncomfortable situations like rape or alternative lifestyle, or politics, in other words, left versus right. And over the next 3 decades, things would completely go downhill. Sure, there were still good shows with good moral fiber to them, like The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, Emergency, Grizzly Adams, Chips. Yet these shows were quickly fixing to be phased out and fall by the wayside, because they were not sexual enough, they were not filthy enough to satisfy man's appetite to take things to the next level and to continuously push the envelope. And then came MTV and the cable channels like HBO, Showtime, USA Network, and various others. HBO and Showtime allowed viewers to watch unedited movies just as seen in the theaters, shows with sexual situations, full frontal nudity, soft porn and obscene language, shows with blood and gore, from torture to murder, to outright genocidal storylines. And eventually there would be even porn channels where you could watch full-blown sex, uncensored. And it still wasn't enough. Now we're almost to the modern day where virtually all movies have to have a belligerent female that weighs 110 pounds and has an attitude the size of Mount Rushmore, and who is capable of beating the stuffing out of 3 or 4 guys 3 times their size. Or a gay character or a gay situation. Or a bigger-than-life character or hero, such as James Bond, who is never killed and hardly ever injured, and has more luck and bravado than most of the superheroes, except he's only a human being. Yet the stories make him much larger than life, much larger than a normal man. And of course, he's always charming and debonair, and always gets the hot supermodel co-star in the movies, and usually ends up having sex with her before the movie ends. But then again, that has become commonplace in most all movies now, where sex is a must. Exposed breasts, full frontal nudity, rough sex are a requirement. Of course, we still have the superheroes, Batman, Superman, the Hulk, Thor the Viking, Iron Man, Spider-Man, and a number of others. But movies today have taken these superheroes away from their clean comic book beginnings and put them right in the modern world, with sex, violence, bloodshed, and where their foes are merciless killers who devise very painful deaths for their adversaries or lackeys who turn on them. And shows came along also which lifted men up to a level higher than man. Shows like Highlander, Forever Knight, and any number of other shows where immortals or vampires or some form of supernatural beings have highlighted powers and fulfill the human desire not to age, which is natural. Because we are not beings which should age, that is, our souls. Our souls are timeless. It is only these flesh bodies that we dwell in that get old and slowly betray us. Yet these movies brought forth those who disassociated themselves from everyday life. It gave rise to a new movement of youth, new goths, or I should say goths, which dress in dark colors with a Victorian appeal. They act as though they are vampires or warlocks. They have disdain for normal everyday life in the light. And of course they crossed into the gender confusion and androgynous areas, which begat cross-dressing or transgender as a site of human confusion. And TV shows and movies pushed ever harder to introduce more and more of the gay and lesbian motif, the transgender motif, which had begun in the 70s with the disco genre of music and pushed in with movies like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So now here we are finally in the modern day, where reality TV is all the rage. Shows where you can sit at home and watch other people fight, bicker, or talk about each other's inadequacies in marriage, or in sex, or in whatever. And all of this slowly came to pass. It took decades to get here. But now the newest books and movies are filled with eroticism, violence, sexual infidelity, gay or lesbian situations, or just plain thug activity. They are full of violence. The same goes for modern music and modern music videos, which highlight being gay or being a slut or a man whore, or infidelity as if it's a wonderful thing, just a normal part of life. And indeed now it is, because so many are so drawn into modern entertainment till they believe that this is the way life really works. That is, if you can call this entertainment. In other words, they have now made normal life totally boring. And shows from the past can't be revived because people didn't screw every night or at every opportunity in them. These new shows make our lives, our jobs, our recreation seem like nothing compared to the glitz and glamour of the lives lived on TV, which aren't even real at all. They are made up. People don't talk or act like the people do in these TV shows or movies. Some may try to mimic them at times, but for the most part, people in real life just don't act this way. Do you know Jesus said, "Beware of the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees"? Well, who were the scribes and Pharisees? There were, of course, the church of his time, the temple, the priests. But they were predominantly made up of these people, which I refer to as the synagogue of Satan, as written, Cain's offspring, the Kenites. I have many studies on this subject, which make clear the identity of these people. But Jesus also said that the scribes sit in the seat of Moses. The seat of Moses is representative of the law and the interpretation of the law. And in the time of Jesus Christ, the scribes and Pharisees were the church. They were the religious, and they dispensed the law, at least for their people. And they hid their greed, their lust for power, and their control over men behind priest robes. And then as now, they still use the church and organized religion, but they also use men of power through politics. They use all the outlets of information available to mankind, such as aforementioned books, TV, cartoons, or regular programming, movies. They own the media, which they have carefully and slowly taken over. So now the media takes sides in politics. And as a majority, the media supports the left wing. The word leaven means yeast. And a little bit of yeast, or leaven, when placed in a lump of dough, spreads all the way through the lump, causing the lump to rise. This is symbolic of a little untruth spreading and becoming accepted as truth, or a little suggestive message about anything from politics to support for certain lifestyles or certain styles or systems of government, such as socialism, being pushed very slowly upon us. And as a small piece of leaven spreading through seizes the entire lump of dough, causing the whole lump to rise. Or better put, causing these ideas to become the norm, or the conventional wisdom, all the while supplanting the truth. Where once men despised socialism or communism, even those living under it, not just those who fought against it, those that were living under it did their best to flee from it, as we saw in Cuba, in Vietnam, in Korea, in Russia, the former USSR or Soviet Union, and actually any nation where it exists. But now, instead of despising socialism, man has been acclimated to it. There has become a push for socialism in this nation and indeed around the entire free world. All because men have forgotten what socialism stands for. And socialism is one of Satan's bargains. In other words, socialism offers freebies. Socialism claims to level the playing field. It lies to those who want something for nothing and tells them that they deserve something for nothing, and promises to give it to them for their support, meaning their votes. Socialism has failed everywhere that it has been implemented. Maybe not at first, but in every nation which has turned socialist, there has always been decline and removal of rights and freedoms. Yet there are those in our own nation who have been brainwashed by too many years of freedom and too many freedoms, to the point where they have abused what it means to have freedom and freedom of speech by demonstrating that they are wholly un-American in their speech or in their policies, in the laws they make. They have now achieved power and are taking our rights away from us, but they do it without announcement. And the media, being their lackeys and cronies, will not tell the truth of the matter, nor report it, nor say anything against it, because the media is largely made up of those who push for the neo-progressive socialist left-wing ideology. My point in the first part of this concerning books, radio, TVs, movies, and so on, And this portion concerning socialism is that we have been slowly conditioned. We have allowed the leaven Jesus warned us of and told us to beware of to spread to the point till no one thinks anything about children watching filth or being propagandized by cartoons or TV or movies, or even children's books where they now highlight gay lifestyles or go green spiel, or world communal living is a wondrous achievement. And the same goes for our schools, our colleges, institutions of higher learning, which are hotbeds for the teaching of perversion or unleashing our carnal side, or indoctrination into socialism. Our children 50 years ago, 60 years ago, were not taught sex education. Yet they learned how to have sex, didn't they? Or else many of us would not even be here. As a matter of fact, the world got by just fine without sex education for many thousands of years since the dawn of human flesh kind. But now sex education is taught. And what is taught to children is to indulge, indulge, indulge. Teachers hand out to children and young adults condoms or prophylactics like foams or the sponge or what have you. And that's like giving a 12-year-old the key to a pornography store. What do you think they will do? Throw away the key and run away? Or use the key and go in and indulge themselves to their young curiosity and awakening testosterone push desires? Along with this, our children have been taught that God is a fable, a creation of man. In other words, we, human beings, created God in religion rather than God creating us and being our Father. What kind of adults are these teachings making our children into? Well, look at the crime statistics from 60 years ago, and then look at the crime statistics today, and since, as a matter of fact. Look at sexually transmitted diseases. Look at unwanted pregnancies and abortion numbers. Look at the number of marriages that fail, or the rising number of alternative lifestyles as people, even young adults seeking a new experience, try sex with their own gender because of the dirty, taboo feeling they get from indulging in it. They get turned on by it in the same way a pedophile or a rapist gets a thrill out of their lifestyles. Are we really so blind till we cannot see that this sex education, this teaching of God as a fable, and even the teaching of evolution has ruined our children's minds and has made them a hopeless generation as far as considering eternal life? It has made them sarcastic and hate-filled for the religious, whom they see as superstitious, misled people who worship a deity because they are afraid of mortality. Or at least that is their reasoning. But who is really ignorant here? And who allowed this to come upon us so that we have been propagandized and deceived to the point of being where we are now in the modern day? We have these destructive things happening right before our eyes. You have a sense of entitlement. where people feel that life is owed to them. You have alternative lifestyles which have been raised up upon a pedestal and pushed in our faces to swallow up our youth. You have atheistic idealism, which is presented in an enticing way to people of all ages. You have entertainment in all the forms mentioned, which make our real lives out here in the real world seem dull, boring, and monotonous by comparison. You have people addicted to so many different kinds of drugs because they cannot take the realities of life. They cannot deal with monotony. They cannot deal with the strife and struggles. They cannot deal with boredom and loneliness. They cannot deal with the trials and tribulations of life. So they run to these escapes. Some choose strong drink. Others choose the drugs. Still others choose other ways to escape, like gambling or running up bills and shopping when they don't have the money to do so. In other words, living beyond their means. Or any number of things that they can come up with to take them away from their day-to-day, daily grind of life. But this too is a pattern being implemented from youth. Because so many kids now, instead of being disciplined properly, are instead excused or diagnosed with things like ADD or ADHD. And they're prescribed drugs to keep them sedated, to keep them from driving their parents insane. It really makes one wonder how those of us who grew up normally, before virtually all children had these quote-unquote diagnosed disorders and prescriptions, dealt with life, and how our parents dealt with us. But that's where good old Dr. Spock and such psychobabble have led us. Because when you cannot discipline your children, of course they will grow up never having known that their actions, negative, will bring negative consequences. And that's where another part of this puzzle comes into play, which is to say, the bleeding heart do-gooder. The well-meaning, those who have more apathy than brains, and let kids get away with anything and everything rather than correcting them as prescribed by our Father in His Word. And then when these kids grow up and later end up in the correctional system, the justice system, there are lawyers who are more interested in the almighty dollar and the notoriety of winning a controversial case than they are justice. And judges who aren't fit to judge a pie baking contest will give them little slaps on the wrist and put them right back on the streets, thus teaching them that they can get away with crime or bad behavior and receive light punishment, which in turn causes them not to be deterred from doing or acting however they wish to act, even if it's totally criminal in nature. But all of this has been carefully orchestrated over a long period of time. Not really so long, because 50 or 60 years in the scheme of life actually goes by fairly quick. But because 50 or 60 years is 50 or 60 years, few have taken notice of the changes. Or maybe they have taken notice, but all they see is that things have gotten worse. And they scratch their heads and can't seem to figure out why, when it's very clear to those who can see. But no matter what happens, how wrong, how perverse, how unrighteous things get, there are always those who will argue for their cause and play devil's advocate. Because money steals away their morality. Bribes, gifts, and entitlements placate them and cause them not to worry about fairness or anything right. And so we are here. And this is how we got here. All one need do is to look back to the past to see that people did not, in former days, not so long ago, act this way. But in these times, mankind has changed and turns the spotlight and the camera on himself and on his desires and wiles, and has forsaken the God that created him. But then again, how can some help it? They have been raised to think that they are the progeny of apes, that there is no God, that law and order are things simply for them to thumb their nose at in rebellion, and to think that unearned gain is deserved. And all that is really important is to have what you want, no matter how you get it. And to escape life at every opportunity through whatever means necessary. Be it drugs, strong drink, sexual liaisons, including infidelity, or to just take that which is not theirs from others and call it right. You know, there was a time when marriage meant something, but no more. Now sexual infidelity is looked on as just a part of life, so deal with it. Affairs are commonplace. Marriages are less in number. And those that do marry usually don't last long, because love has been so devalued to everyone wants love and to be loved, but they know that love is disposed of as easily as throwing away a bag of old clothes now. And some have found that they can invest years with a partner who they thought was their soulmate or the one, only to find that it can all come tumbling down and be dissolved by a judge's gavel or the stroke of a lawyer's pen. So they figure, why bother? This too is part of the decline. As attitudes have become relaxed about infidelity and these strange sexual liaisons, even the ones with one's own gender, they have become the conventional wisdom and are now seen as common, when they are still as perverse or as hurtful as they ever were. But then again, as I said, this has been a long, slow process of acclimating mankind, or should I say, brainwashing mankind into accepting that was once unacceptable behavior. So here we are, living in an ever more socialist nation where our rights are being taken away from us daily, and where we're being forced to accept the unacceptable because it was done at the pace of a crawl. But the crawl is now getting faster as the days go by, and we are accelerating or spiraling out of control. That is to say, our control, and deeper into the control of our puppet masters, who are bent upon the destruction of this nation. Why else would generations of Americans be raised to hate their own country and see their own nation and people as a bully nation, a conquering, insatiable force, when the United States is the freest, greatest nation to ever have existed upon the earth, with more freedoms than have ever been known anywhere at any time, and with more opportunity than there has ever been in history, save of maybe our sister Britain. Yet our brainwashed, indoctrinated youth hate our nation, which has given them everything. The hardest choice they've had to make in most cases is Burger King or McDonald's. Yet angry radicals from the turmoil of the 60s and 70s, which also hate us and are on a quest to overthrow us, have coerced the youth to anger about issues and policies which the youth don't even really understand. The angry baby boomers from the late 60s and 70s are pushing socialism as hard as they can. And the worst part is there are those that stand by with slack jaw, never noticing the obvious, never daring to speak out against it if they do, for fear that they will be labeled with a negative stigma. And again, at the head of all of this, the sons of Cain, the Kenites. And do you know what the Kenite is above all else? Some will say, well, that is, some who understand who they are and what they are will say, well, the Kenites are evil, underhanded, liars, manipulators, all of which are true. But what they are, more than the rest of these, is jealous. They have been jealous since Cain, who was jealous of righteous Abel. They have been jealous since Jesus Christ, who was righteous, and the scribes and Pharisees conspired against him and caused his death. And their progeny, who own the world today, punish achievement. They punish those who pull their own weight and reward those who do not make their own way. They reward the criminal and punish the law-abiding with technicalities and loopholes in the law, which they created under the precedents set by men. Furthermore, they ruin any good policy or system in place that works by making it fail through manipulation. Or they have their mouthpieces say it's failing even when it's doing wonderful. And they have their cronies in the left wing point the finger and say, these policies are what got us into this mess in the first place. It's no different than if the Kenites were a big-name department store that moved into a little town, or placed a big department store in a small town with mom-and-pop stores, and caused all the mom-and-pop stores to close down because they could not compete with the big-name stores' prices or large assortment of goods. And then the Kenites will say, "Aha, you see, another small business has bit the dust," because of how evil capitalist system works. When they are the ones who caused the mom and pop stores to close down in the first place by placing the big store right next door. And they knew it would happen before they ever placed the big store there in the small town, because they knew the small town businesses could not compete with the big store. And this is the method of the Kenite. They play both sides of the fence and always have. They argue for the big store's right to be in the town, and then they argue that the big store ruined the mom and pop stores and caused them to close down, and it's all manipulation. And again, this is how we've gotten here. The powers that be have ruined the housing market in much the same way, by creating a period of prosperity where people were buying up houses, and then these powers that be began to whine and say, it's unfair that some should have nice houses and others who are poor should not have nice houses. So they created entitlement, HUD homes, low-income family homes, and gave loans to people that they knew would never be able to pay those loans back. And once they couldn't pay them back, then they came in and seized the homes and auctioned them off. Many times for less than their value, even half the value, which caused a panic and caused the housing market to drop like a rock. And then they, the authors of the fall, said, this has been caused by greed and hatred for minorities, when they are the ones who did it. Again, the Kenites are a jealous people, and have been since their father Cain killed his brother Abel. And for this cause they also killed our Lord and Savior, because he spake truth which they despise. He uncovered their foundation and showed what hypocrites they were, and they conspired. He called them out on their lies, and on their teachings. He spake truth, and they set about to kill him. He did miracles, and healed and cast out devils, which they could not do, seeing as they were of the devil. And Jesus named them in Matthew chapter 23 and John chapter 8. And they caused his crucifixion by political might. Imagine the political might it took for them, a conquered people, or I should say, a portion of a conquered people, because the Kenite is not really of Israel or the tribe of Judah. They are infiltrators. They are foreigners. However, they have adopted the name Jew. But that does not mean they are of the tribe of Judah, nor the children of promise of Israel. But imagine the political might it took for this people to get Rome, their conquerors, to kill Jesus. The Kenite is never powerless. except when it comes to standing against God. And they are hidden away. And they accuse and lie and point fingers, or have their lackeys do it for them. This has always been their way. There are 5 things that Americans with any sense should know. And they are, you cannot legislate the poor into prosperity by legislating the wealthy out of prosperity. What one person receives without working, another person must work for without receiving. The government cannot give anybody anything without first taking it from someone else. You cannot multiply wealth by dividing it. And when half of the people get the idea that they do not have to work because the other half is going to take care of them, then when the other half gets the idea that it does no good to work because someone else is going to get what they worked for, that is the beginning of the end of this nation. And this is how we got here. It's been a long, slow road. If any of these policies had been implemented, let's say in the 1940s, they would have never have stood. In the 1950s, they would have never have stood. Even into the 60s, most likely they never would have stood. But the Kenites are a cunning people. They do the bidding of their father, because they are of their father, the devil. And by cunning means they have achieved all this, and brought this upon us. And the rest of the problem is the freedoms that we have in this nation and in the world. Because there are so many freedoms, because there are so many indulgences, because there are so many entertainments, because there are so many distractions, and so many things to do and see, people don't take the time to read their Father's Word and learn of the Kenite. And others will read their Father's Word, but will never get the message. Because they're indoctrinated or spoon-fed from pulpits, which can't even begin to understand the complexity of our Father's Word. And perhaps rightly so. Perhaps that's for their protection. Jesus spoke in parables so that some by hearing would not understand. And it's also written that God has put the spirit of slumber upon some. But this is how we got here. And it isn't over yet. And really, there is no hope of defeating it. I mean, of course, we already have the victory through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And the game is over. And those of us who know the truth shall be on the winning team. But until then, we have to endure. And part of the enduring is that we're going to have to watch the Kenites seize full power. We're going to see socialism rise to even newer heights. We're going to see our rights taken away from us, and we're going to see one world government rise. And eventually, we're going to see a false Christ come here, and our brothers and sisters of Christianity are going to fall and worship him in ignorance, because they have not understood their Father's word. They are in the famine of the end times. They have not known the voice of the true shepherd. And it's really too bad. At any rate, this has just been another one of my commentaries and rants. Again, to blow off a little steam, to put things in perspective to those of you that listen and understand, and to confuse and anger those who don't understand, to turn the hearts of the children to their fathers, if you understand that saying. It is my prayer for you that you will not be deceived by these things, that your eyes are open, that your ears are open, and that you are attuned, and that you can see all these things going on. And if you are not awake now, that maybe by listening to these commentaries and to these Bible studies and taking a look back, a hard, long look back, you will understand the method and how we got here. And in so doing, turn to our Father and ask for wisdom, ask for understanding, repent and seek his counsel, sit and talk with him, and remind him of his promises. But you have to know those promises before you can remind him of them. May God bless all of those who seek the truth, and may the mercy of our Father be on those who don't. Thank you for listening. This has been Just Thoughts.